So we also want to take a moment and look at your ethical considerations when working from home because they are similar to when you're working in an office, but sometimes we forget that we have those same obligations and we have to make accommodations to make certain those ethical considerations are being taken into account. The first one to look at, there's no formal rule, but they do have an opinion out that governs the American Bar Association has looked at virtual practice. And when it comes to having a virtual practice, the biggest thing they want attorneys to consider is make sure you're competent in the technology that you're using. Make sure you've taken into account maintaining client confidentiality and your role as a supervisor, supervising staff. So they're defining virtual practice as a technologically enabled law practice beyond the traditional brick and mortar law firm, which, as Jeff mentioned earlier, that's kind of what you started seeing more of even before COVID, but it exploded during COVID. So 498 is going to discuss your ethics rules that are most likely to be violated by remote, which is your competence, your diligence, communication, confidentiality, and supervision. So when it comes to competence, any legal service shall mean applying the diligence, the learning and skill, and the mental, emotional, and physical ability to reasonably necessary for the performance of such a service. Now, that's directly from the California Rules of Professional Conduct, but it's kind of a summary of what goes on in ABA Model Rule 1.1. So that's what they mean by being competent. You need to know how this technology works. You need to know what are the potential pitfalls and make accommodations for that. Now, for confidentiality, requires that lawyers keep all information relating to a representation confidential, and there is no exception for working remotely. So one of the big things to remember there is that if you say you have a family computer that you're doing some of your work on, you can't let your child do their homework on the same computer, or you have to have some system of effectively screening to where they don't have access to your client-related files. So keeping a separate computer is the best practice, keeping separate printers, separate everything that you can to make sure that the information stays contained and protected. Now, ABA Formal Opinion 495 on attorneys working remotely. Reads that lawyers may remotely.
Sorry, Ashley, it just keeps bouncing back and forth. I don't know why.
Are you touching it?
It's
okay.
There we go.
All right. Lawyers may remotely practice in the law of the jurisdictions in which they are licensed while physically present in a jurisdiction in which they are not admitted, if that local jurisdiction has not determined that the conduct is the unlicensed or unauthorized practice of law, and if they do not hold themselves out as being licensed to practice in the local jurisdiction, do not advertise or otherwise hold out as having an office in the local jurisdiction, and do not provide or offer to provide legal services in the local jurisdiction. You sort of saw a great migration when COVID hit, to where lawyers found out that since they didn't have to go into the office, they were working from home. Their home could be anywhere as long as they could remotely access what they needed to at the office. So you might have a lawyer whose practices in Pennsylvania, but they actually are living in their home in Florida. And so they're practicing remotely from that location. You can do that as long as there's no rule in place that makes that qualify as unauthorized practice of law. You just have to be wary of where you're advertising, how you're indicating where you're licensed at, and just follow the rules sort of to the letter of both the state that you're in and the state that you're licensed to practice in. So the formal opinion basically concluded that as long as the lawyer's conduct is not considered to be unauthorized practice of law in the domiciled jurisdiction, the remote practice from that jurisdiction is acceptable. For confidentiality, the possibility that a confidential client communication could be compromised increases whenever lawyers and staff are working remotely. You have a lot of people who aren't necessarily part of the law firm having easier access to the client's information. So you have to ensure that your computers, your tablets, your phones, any electronic device is password protected and encrypted so that others, including the family members, don't have access to the confidential information. And like I said before, it just means your child can't use your workstation for homework assignments. So when it comes to safeguarding your client's information, You need to look at secure file sharing and storage options. Make sure you've enabled your encryption and your password protection. Make sure your antivirus and malware software is both present and up to date. Employ a virtual private network. Now, this is going to protect you on using Wi-Fi. And this is especially important if you end up in a public place using a public Wi-Fi. Also, enable a firewall to protect your client information. And with that, Jeff is going to go into some more detail about secure file sharing.
All right. First of all,